Hey guys, in the fast lane here. This is a 2015 Hyundai Veloster GDI 1.6 liter Gamma engine. Now these are direct injection, so gasoline direct injection. And how these engines are set up is the fuel injector is underneath the valves and it shoots it right into the combustion chamber. Now that doesn't sound so bad, but what happens is it doesn't wash the valves off, and the valves end up getting a lot of carbon buildup, and it ends up washing the piston rings, and then the piston rings wear down, or they get a lot of carbon buildup, and the fuel washes right past the piston, gets into the oil, and then you get more than 2% gasoline in your oil, and it'll pretty much destroy your engine. It'll make your rod and main bearings. You could throw a rod or spin a main or rod bearing, and when that happens, the engine's done. But another thing that it does is it just wears everything out internally, and it causes you to burn oil like crazy because the piston rings, they don't seal properly, and the oil is just going right up out of the crank and oil pan up over the piston and burning it right out your exhaust, and that is how you get a bad catalytic converter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to run the B12 treatment that a lot of people talk about. How this works is you take your spark plugs out, you pour in the B12 over the piston, so the piston's right here, you pour it up maybe an inch and you let it sit for 2 or 3 days until it's basically empty, till it washed down into the oil pan. Then after that, you're going to go ahead and do a complete oil change. You need to do that. If you don't do an oil change, you're going to get that stuff in there. It's going to wreak havoc and do just what the gasoline does. So we're going to do that. I went ahead and drew this up real quick. As you can see, the injector is underneath the valve. Normally, with the EFI, electronic fuel injection, it would be up here and it would be spraying down on the valve. With a GDI, it sprays it underneath the injector into the combustion chamber immediately, and it just creates a whole carbon buildup situation. If you'd like to take a screenshot, here's the picture right here. Just go ahead and take a quick screenshot. Now, the reason why I'm using B12 Chemtool instead of other fuel injector cleaners, this one is super potent. I mean, even when you crack the cap on it, it's way stronger than other ones, and this one has some of the best reviews I've seen. First thing I suggest is disconnecting your battery. If you happen to accidentally turn the key just not thinking about it, and we have the B12 in the cylinders, you will hydro lock it and blow your engine. Bend a rod, send a rod out the side of the block, it'll happen. So go ahead and disconnect the battery just for safe precaution. Next step, we're just going to go ahead and disconnect these coil packs, and then we're going to go ahead and take off the 10mm bolts, pull them out, and then we're going to pull the spark plugs out. Now, before I go ahead and pull these coil packs, it would be best just to go ahead and brush out all this dirt and grime. We don't want that getting into the cylinders. It'll wreak havoc. So go ahead and just brush out all this stuff and just brush it to the side of the engine and get it out of this galley right here off the valve cover. Now, on this last coil pack right here, go ahead and unplug the high pressure fuel pump right here. Take that off. Now you'll be able to sneak this coil pack out. We got them all pulled out right here. And the next thing to do is go ahead and remove these spark plugs. Have a look at cylinder 1. Now, looking at cylinder 1, it looks a little orange, but that was from running other treatments, such as fuel injector cleaner through the fuel system. Cylinder 2, pretty much the same deal. Cylinder 3, same situation. And here is cylinder 4. Same consistency. Looking good. Now that all the spark plugs are pulled out, I'm going to run this endoscope. We're going to have a look down in these cylinders and see how dirty the tops of the pistons are. Can't see the side of the rings, but it'll give us a good idea. This is cylinder 1, and as you can see, look at all that carbon buildup If we have carbon like that on the sides, then you know there's a lot of carbon everywhere else. On the rings for sure. This is cylinder 2. And as you can see, piston's a little higher, but it's completely caked up. I mean, that's really carboned up. Let's check out cylinder 3. Cylinder 3, same situation, super carboned up. The tops are real carbon. So if the tops got carbon on them, the sides definitely do. Cylinder 4. Cylinder 4 looks pretty carbed up. Not as bad as cylinder 1, but either way, you see that right there, that hard shiny black, that's all burnt oil right there. And in the middle, it's just really caked up. What I'm going to use is just an old water bottle. I marked it so I can get each cylinder with the same volume, and then a long funnel with just a long extension so it fits down in here. We'll just come down in here like this, line it up with the hole, and then we'll just pour it in that cylinder, that cylinder, that cylinder, that cylinder. I'm going to go ahead and fill it up right here. Another thing you could do, if you want all the cylinders level, which I don't care, I have a syringe that's going to suction everything out of these cylinders, no problem, it's long. But if you have maybe a short syringe or something and you need to get it right off the top, you can come down here and turn the crank. Just take, you can get a wooden stick as long as it's clean, or a 1/4 inch ratchet extension, a long one. This right here is just a plastic straw, just a long straw. You could just stick it down here in the cylinder like that. Rotate the engine crank right here, just rotate it until it kind of gets level with the other ones. Then you'll know your cylinders are all level. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to fill this up real quick, and then I'll be pouring it in. This stuff literally smells like acetone. All right, we have it to the line. Make sure you wear some kind of respirator, or make sure your garage is open or your shop's open. I'm gonna go ahead and pour this down in here now. I'm gonna do it to the next one. I imagine this stuff evaporates really quick, so take a paper towel and just plug up the hole so no air gets in there to kind of blow it out. Plug it up like that, leave it like that. You could put the spark plugs in if you really wanted to. This is just easier. There's cylinder 2. That one went a little too high. As you can see, it ran off. I'm going to go half on that one. So that might be a reason why you might want to drop it. My cylinders right here, the 2 in the middle, were a little bit high. If that happens, you can go ahead and turn the crank just to drop it down a little. On this one, I'm doing about half because it's the higher cylinder. That works good. And the last cylinder, cylinder number 4. Go ahead and grab some paper towels. Put them in each cylinder. Just to keep it from evaporating. Because by the smell of this, it's evaporating quick. Now we'll check it pretty much every couple hours, maybe every 5 hours, 10 hours. But we're going to let this sit for more than likely 2 to 3 days. And just make sure there's liquid in there. If there's not, you can add a little more. The idea is you want it to just completely go into the oil pan. And then we'll do an oil change, and it should be good then. Then it breaks up all the carbon around the oiling rings and the piston rings. The idea is you want that to stay above the piston as long as possible, so it can do cleaning on top of the piston and on the side of the piston rings. Now here's a good shot of what you want to see. When I shake the vehicle, you can see it sloshing around in there. That's the B12 above the piston. That's what you want to see. So it's been about 5 days. Let this sit. I kept topping it off a little bit, but the B12 is still floating in there above the piston. That's another thing that you want to look into. When you fill this up, make sure it's above the piston. Even though it looks like it, this engine is on a tilt right now. That means that the fluid is going to move to the back a little, and it could be leaving a little gap at the front of the piston where the front of the piston isn't getting covered with the B12. So make sure it's more than enough to cover the entire piston with the engine tilted. Right now I'm just going to go ahead and remove the tissue paper, and then I'm going to get a suction tool and I'm going to pull out the rest of the B12, possibly pull the fuse. I'm going to pull the fuse over here, over on this side over here. We're going to pull that fuse for the fuel pump and crank it. Just get some of that excess fluid out of there because you don't want to hydro lock your engine. And then put the spark plugs back in, put the coil packs back in, and then I'm going to drop the tray on the bottom and do an oil change. And I've already checked it a little earlier. We still have B12 fluid in there above the piston. I'm going to be using one of these suction tools. It has these long extensions right here, and I'll be able to shove it down into the spark plug hole and pull out the B12 that's in there right now. Now how this works is you just take one of these long straws, you take the fatter one, you just push it in here. This has a quick release. All you do is push down right here and pull out, and then when you push in, it locks in. If you need to release it, you just push down on this blue circle. Then we take this end and we shove it like this. And now we have an extra long straw that we can place down into the cylinder. I'm going to go ahead and take this off. I don't want that falling in anywhere. Now I'm going to shove this into cylinder 1, just all the way down in the hole. As far as it goes, hit the piston. And we're going to pull out on this suction hose. Now make sure you save your B12 cans, because we got to put this back in the can. Check out cylinder 2. Cylinder 3. Wow, cylinder 3 is really dark. Look how dark that is. That must have had a lot of carbon, a lot. And last but not least, cylinder 4. See how this one does. That one looks like it lost some. Not a lot in there. That probably leaked past the rings. Now that we have as much as we can get out with the suction tool, we're going to leave the spark plugs out, no coil packs, and we're going to connect the battery. We're going to pull the fuel pump fuse, and then we're just going to crank it and blow out any remaining liquid in those cylinders. Now we're going to come over here and access this fuse box, and you flip it up like this. You can look at the shape, and that's how this shape is. So this is how you look at it. And right here, if I can find it real quick, here we are, fuel pump. So right here it says F pump, 15 amp or 20 amp. Now we're going to come here. We got row 1, 2, and 3. So row 1, 2, and 3. So it's in this row right here. Now we're going to look, and it looks like it's 8 down. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the 6th one, if you look closely, the 6th one is a space. So we'll come over here. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is the space, 7, 8. So there's our 15 amp fuse right there, the last one. On this particular vehicle, we have a little fuse puller. So go ahead and take this out. All you do is push it over the fuse like that, pull up. Now that we have the fuse pulled for the fuel pump, make sure everything's disconnected. We're going to go ahead in the vehicle and crank it over. Before we do that, we got to put the battery cables back on, and then we'll crank it real quick. We'll crank it until we get all the vapors and everything out of these cylinders, till it's dry. Turn it off, and then we'll put everything back together. Got the battery connected. Go ahead and put your fuse box cover back on. We don't want anything blowing into there, especially flammable. Now we're going to go ahead and crank it. After we're done cranking it and it's dry, we're going to go ahead and change the oil. That's crucial. Some of this stuff did more than likely slip down past the rings, get into the oil, and you don't want that. So go ahead and change it afterwards. There we go. Everything's cleared out. We don't have any more B12 in the system. We had pulled the fuel pump fuse, so that means that no fuel went in there. We're good to go. Once we went ahead and purged out the cylinders, they are a little dirty in the spark plug holes, as you can see. So we'll just take some paper towel, put it down in there all the way, and just kind of twist it, clean it up a little bit. There we go. Clean it up a little bit. Not crazy, but just get them presentable. Then we can put the spark plugs back in. And then off to changing the oil. All in all, it wasn't too bad. It was mainly just carbon dust that came out of there. Once I put the coil packs back on and seal, I'll go ahead and brush some of this carbon off. When you blow on it, it just kind of moves around. I don't want it to go back into the cylinders. Something unusual that seems to work really well is those little solar lights. This is a stand. You just pull this out, then you got this perfect little PVC pipe that fits down in there. You just take some paper towel, put it around like that, and then shove it all the way down to the bottom, kind of twist it a little bit, pull up, there you go. Cleans out the bottom ring where the spark plug would seat. That's important. A more common thing would be a 3/8 extension. Now this right here, use the back of it, slide it in like this. Now you got to be more careful with this because it is metal and you don't want to scratch the aluminum seat on the cylinder head. So just kind of gently put it in there and turn it, pull up. This helps clean out that spark plug seat. And even the sidewalls, if you turn it around. Look at all that. So just use that as a tip. It'll help you a lot. Now I'm going to go ahead and clean off this spark plug. I take a stainless steel brush. I'm just going to clean off the ground strap. And then I'm going to clean off the cathode right here underneath it. So we'll just keep doing that. Eventually I'm going to replace these with some NGKs. Now I'm going to go ahead and put these spark plugs back in. I cleaned it up. Before I do, I'm just going to put a little bit of anti-seize, just a little dab right there where it meets the threads in the cylinder head. We're going to go ahead and torque that down. You can take your glove or whatever and just rub it around right there. And that'll prevent it from seizing up in the future, but you don't want to get it on the cathode or electrode and the ground strap. Definitely don't want to do that. Go ahead and put this in there and tighten it by hand first. Always check your spark plug gap. These have already been gapped right before this, so the gap is correct. Go ahead, hand tighten it, and then we're going to torque this down to 14 foot-pounds. This is a 2015 Hyundai Veloster 1.6 non-turbo. There it is, 14 pounds. That's all you need. No more, no less. You'll be good. And just so you know, that is foot-pounds. I said 14 pounds, but it's 14 foot-pounds, not inch-pounds, but foot-pounds. Now this works for pretty much every vehicle. You can do this to any vehicle that has a real problem with carbon buildup. The GDI engines have this problem because they have put the fuel injectors underneath the valves. And what happens is a lot of carbon gets built up on those valves. It gets in the cylinders, then the cylinders start to cake up, and you get some scoring in the future, or it seizes up the rings on the piston and oil gets by. And the only way to keep this from continuing to happen is to keep the valves and cylinder clean. And really the only way you do that is 3,000 mile oil changes, which is unfortunate, and possibly injector and fuel treatment. So yeah, it's a tough situation the way these GDI engines are set up, but it's not something that works out very well. In a nutshell, these engines run good until they don't. And when they don't, you run with problems of going through 2 quarts of oil in less than a month. What we're going to do is we're going to fill the oil up probably right around halfway, maybe even 75% mark. We'll have a reference, and then we'll come back around 2 weeks later, and about the 2-week mark you could fill this thing halfway, and 2 weeks later it would be below the low mark. Just gonna put these coil packs back in real quick. And with these, I'm just going to hand tighten them with a ratchet. Just hand tighten them until they get snug. No need to over tighten them or anything. Give them a little light impact till they stop, and then hit them with the hand socket. No, I was not torquing them down like that. Strip those out in 2 seconds flat. But doing this for decades, you get real good with your trigger finger, and you can control it pretty well. Now we just put the clips back on. These always tend to break off. There's a little zip tie trick. If they're really broken off, you can run a zip tie through this end and pull it, and it'll keep it locked in. It's unfortunate. They make real brittle plastic. Like this one right here clips out. You could pop that gray part out and stick a little mini zip tie in there and pull it, and it would lock it in. Now you do this after. So you put this on like this, and then you run the zip tie through there and pull real tight, and then it won't let it out. It's unfortunate. It's possibly, that's the wrong one. It's possibly that ABS plastic. And then we got to plug in the high pressure fuel pump. That's what this guy is right here, high pressure fuel pump. Come on now. Oh, wrong way. Had clips on either side. Now that we've done this, we got everything on, we're going to go ahead and put the fuse back in. We have it on slot 8, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. Slot 8. Then we can go ahead and put this guy back in. And then the last thing, if you look right here, we have 2 rubber grommets, and then there's another 2 right here on the end. The easiest way is to kind of scoop it and line these two up. You can see back here we got them lined up. Get those started, and then everything goes right on. Easy peasy. I'm gonna be going with Castrol Edge, and then it's synthetic, but it's 5W30. Now if you look at the cap over here, it says 5W20. We're not gonna go with that. That's just too thin of oil, especially in a hot state. It gets real thin, and that just encourages it to go past the oil and piston rings, and we don't want that. I also went with a genuine oil filter. So this is a OEM Hyundai oil filter, and that's what I'm going to be replacing it with. Now in this particular vehicle you have this underbody, and there's quite a few bolts. So we have one over here, we have one right there, one right there, and then over here on the other side we have another one right there. That one's actually missing. And then in the back, looks like we might have one over there, and possibly there's another one right there. We have to come under here and take this undercarriage off, then we can access the oil filter. Now we have that underbody tray off. I'm just going to use the impact with the 17 just to break it loose. There we go. No bashing your knuckles when you're trying to break it free with a wrench. Let's go ahead and try to sneak it out without getting soaked. So unscrew it. When you get it off the thread, hold it forward. It's tricky. There we go. And then pull it. There we go. That worked. This right here is looking like it's becoming a problem. This is the second time that this owner has taken a vehicle to a service department, like an oil change department, and the oil filter has been 2 fingers loose. Look at this. I kid you not. That's exactly the way it was. That's not sealing. If air gets in the system and the oil pump can't create like a Venturi effect, it'll get air and it won't suck up any more oil, and you're in big trouble. Can you believe that? That's exactly how loose this oil filter was. That's a huge no-no. And you know how this happens? This happens when you don't put oil on the oil filter ring at the top. The oil filter ring, the rubber O-ring, prematurely grips and stops early and doesn't fully compress and torque down properly. You always want to put a little bit of oil at the top of that O-ring so that it can slide and slide and slide until you grip it down. Not doing that, this is exactly what happens, and this thing will literally vibrate right off and you'll blow your engine. Stuff like this is inexcusable. Now that the oil is all drained out, you want to check this drain bolt and just make sure that the washer is nice and smooth. If it's not, and you're pinching pennies, you can take it off and use some fine grit sandpaper and smooth it out, clean it off, make sure there's no metal particles, and then put it back on, or you can just replace it with a new one at the auto parts store. Now here's the new oil filter, and this is the rubber O-ring I was talking about. This has to have oil on it. If you don't, you'll get a case like that over there where prematurely gets tight, and then later when the customer drives off, it loosens up and the engine can get blown. So all we do, I personally fill my oil filters when they're upside down like this. I don't like any situation where there's a little bit of air gap. Try to minimize it. So you can let that soak for a little bit. It'll get into the wick of the filter. And you just take a little dab of your finger and you run it all around the O-ring. This is a must. So make sure you do this. It's kind of neat that we got to see what happens when you don't do this. The filter gets loose with vibration and everything, and with heat, that O-ring starts to compress, and then you get a loose oil filter. So look at that, filled it up, and all the air in the wick came out, and you keep doing this, and it'll really saturate that wick inside there. So as you can see, this is about the third time filling it, and look at how far down it's gone. It literally saturates all in that wick, and this is why I personally like to fill my oil filters before I install them, because it really shows you how much it takes to fully saturate those wicks and to get all the air out of the system. So this will sit here and this will keep going down until that wick is completely saturated. Before I install that new filter, I'm just going to clean this up real quick. Try to get as much as you can while you have access to it. There we go. Now we'll take the filled oil filter. There we go. And this is the part where it slides now. See, it slides. I gotta get a paper towel because my hands have some oil on them. But this is where you can really tighten it up good. And it won't come loose like the other time. There we go. That's nice and compressed. It's not going anywhere. The next time you go to do an oil change, it'll still be tight. That's what we want. You don't want that oil filter getting loose while you're driving. It'll be a bad trip. Now all that's left is just put the undercarriage on. I'm just going to put that back on, that plastic panel, and then we'll go get to filling the oil. Now I'll go ahead and take off the oil cap. Now this one, as you can see, says SAE 5W20, but we're going to be using Castrol Edge 5W30. Slide this down in there, 3/4 of the way. We have 2.5 quarts. We'll just check the dipstick. Quickly wipe it off, recheck again. Let's see where we're at. It's really clear right now. It's kind of hard to see, but you can see it. So halfway, go ahead and run the engine. Check it again. If it's halfway, then it's good. I'm going to add just a little bit more to bring it up. Now don't worry, this is going to take a little bit to start. So if it cranks for a while, just do intervals of a little bit of cranking, stop, try it again, try it again. Eventually it'll fire. So as you can see, it takes a lot of cranking. You got to get everything pretty much out of the system. I got a lot of it out, but it still prevents it from cranking after a while. You're probably going to have to hit it up with possibly a battery charger in the process of cranking it. So take rest because you don't want to burn out your starter, but keep going at it until it fires up. It'll eventually fire. There we go, we got it running. Just let it run and it'll clear itself out eventually. If it dies, try to start it again. Don't give up, it'll eventually fire up. So this is what it's running like. It's starting to get there. Eventually it'll smooth out and you won't even notice it. Another thing to point out, it's highly likely that you're going to have some check engine lights going. You can clear those codes. It's going to be probably an engine misfire, which obviously it definitely was misfiring. But don't worry about it. You can go ahead and clear those codes and then run it. As you can see now, it's starting to smooth out, a little under 1,000. Once it warms up, it should drop down and run real smooth. If you're concerned that maybe one of your coil packs is misfiring, go ahead and test that real quick. This is an automotive magnetic faults indicator pen. It's got a little light on it. So these coil packs are working good. It beeps at the RPM of the firing order. So if it fires faster, it'll beep faster. If it beeps, the RPMs are lower, it'll be slower. Before I ran the engine, it was full. Once I ran it, there we are. We're at like the halfway mark. You can see halfway mark right there. So halfway mark, that's why you got to double check when you fill your oil. Got to fill it up a little bit more, maybe 3/4. You can leave it there, but I'm going to go a little higher. I just went ahead and added a 1/2 quart more. That should be fine. So it's probably about 75%, 3/4 up the stick. And we'll leave it at that. And we'll come back about 2 weeks, see where we're at. This is after running it a little bit. You can see how it's a lot smoother. It's not jumping around. It's going to take, I would say, once you finish this, it's going to take a good 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes to get it all cleaned out of the system and idling properly again. So don't worry if you start your engine, it's all rough and it's 10 minutes still acting that way. It takes time to get it out of the system. So just keep running it, drive it around the block. Eventually it'll smooth out. I noticed that mine ran fine. Well, not ran fine, it was a little jumpy, and then after I turned it off, started again, it started running smoother. So it could have been a misfire, but we're good. We're going to perform one more check. Ran the engine again for quite some time. And we'll just check where we're at on the dipstick. Alright, so we're right at the very top. Right at the very top. There we go. Right at the top. You can see it right there. Right on the dot on the F. Just a quick heads up, don't overfill your oil like I did. I didn't overfill it, but this vehicle does not like it when it's at the top F line. I don't know why. I've never actually seen a vehicle act this way, but it threw the oil pressure light the whole time. It would go on and off every once in a while, but it was constantly staying on for the most part. And I thought, well, maybe we got an oil pressure problem, or maybe the oil pressure sensor is going bad. Turns out I dropped it down to 3/4, about 75% above the low, quarter down below the F mark, and the pressure light went off. And it hasn't come back on. I took it around the block, revved it out, nothing. So if your guys' oil pressure light comes on, make sure you don't have it at the full line. It has been 2 weeks since this B12 treatment. We're going to go ahead and pull up this dipstick and see where the levels are. Before, it was just a hair past halfway. So let's see what it is. And honestly, looks like it's looking about the same exact area. Really close. Before, this would be all the way down to the dot on the low after 2 weeks. So this definitely did the trick. All in all, does B12 work? I would say yes, absolutely it does work. On this particular engine, I believe it was cylinder 3 that had all the carbon buildup. When I pulled it out, as you saw earlier, it came out black where the other ones came out brown. So this one definitely had the most carbon buildup. And that could have been the only cylinder really dumping all the oil into the catalytic exhaust system.